This is an NBC News special report. Here's Willie Geist.
Good morning. We're coming on the air with the breaking news that Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina has died. Emergency responders rushed to the senator's Washington home on Saturday evening after a report of a person suffering cardiac arrest. Graham's family released a statement several hours later announcing the senator had died after a brief and sudden illness. His death sending shockwaves across Washington this morning and in a 71-year-old senator's home state of South Carolina. Let's get right to NBC's Julie Tsirkin with more on what we know. Julie, good morning.
Willie, good morning. And the senator did so much for the people of South Carolina over his 4 terms in the Senate, more years spent in the House before that. Senator Lindsey Graham, before he was even a lawmaker, he rose to prominence as a lawyer in the impeachment trial of Bill Clinton. He was a military lawyer by trade. He was still in the reserves when he got to Congress. That's what shaped his foreign policy views, which were very hawkish, Willie. In the last several years since the war began in Ukraine, he has somehow maintained being a close ally of President Trump, pushing him on Ukraine, pushing him to side with President Zelensky, and at the same time able to maintain a relationship with those across the aisle. And that is, Willie, what makes this news so shocking and so devastating. For the fact that Senator Lindsey Graham, who provided so many services for his constituents in South Carolina, brought so many jobs to that state, also somebody viewed as a hawk on matters from Ukraine to the Middle East. He often, Willie, told me about, especially after the October 7th attacks, about how he wanted a normalization deal for the region in the Middle East. He had pushed the president in the last several weeks, and even dating back to February, to take those strikes, decisive strikes in Iran, to take out that supreme leader there. No doubt, Willie, that Graham has been an enormous influence on the president, one of the very few remaining that has been able to essentially hold the president's ear on topics that other Republicans have shied away from. And this morning, of course, we heard from the president, who said it is so sad to hear the news of Senator Graham's passing, just turning 71 years old, Willie, a couple of days ago, returning from Kyiv, where he toured drone production facilities with President Zelensky, announcing at the end of that meeting with Zelensky, good news that the White House agreed after more than a year to move bipartisan legislation in Congress that would issue sanctions on Russian oil. And that, according to Graham, has been something that has been funding Putin's war in Ukraine. So just a massive influence in the Senate, in Washington, D.C., in South Carolina, and around the world, Willie.
And part of that service, more than 30 years in the Air Force Reserve. Julie Tsirkin at the White House. Julie, thanks so much. Senator Graham had been a scheduled guest on Meet the Press this morning. Let's turn to Kristen Welker, moderator of that program. Kristen, good morning. It feels very early to be talking about legacy. This news is so fresh and so shocking to many people waking up. But let's talk a little bit about Senator Graham and the long road he's taken through South Carolina and in Washington, a convert on President Trump. They ran against each other in the 2016 presidential election. He was very critical, but now one of those senators, as Julie was just saying, who does have the president's ear on some matters.
Absolutely, Willie. What a shocking and devastating morning here in the nation's capital, which will undoubtedly send shockwaves all across the country. Senator Lindsey Graham was one of the most consequential senators in U.S. history. As you say, he actually ran against then candidate Trump all the way back in 2015, but he did become an early convert. And Willie, from that moment forward, he became one of President Trump's closest and staunchest allies. I spoke with President Trump briefly on the phone today. He will be joining us on Meet the Press to reflect on Senator Graham's life and legacy. And one of the points that Senator Graham wanted to discuss, which I also discussed with President Trump, was Iran. Senator Graham had, as Julie just said, just been traveling overseas. He was in Ankara where the NATO summit was underway. He visited with President Zelensky. He had a very hawkish view on these matters, Willie. I spoke to Senator Graham multiple times this week. He did not have confidence in the negotiations and in the negotiators in Iran themselves, and he was advocating for a more robust military response to what we have seen in Iran. And if he were here today, that is what we would be talking about, Willie. He will not be, but we still plan to have some of those discussions, which he really put at the forefront. And I think one of the questions becomes, where do those debates go from here without that voice in the room, without that voice in the ear on the golf course with President Trump? But he also had an impact on domestic policy as well. He was on the Judiciary Committee. And so he really touched a wide swath of Washington politics, Willie.
He certainly will be missed there in Washington and in South Carolina as well. Kristen, this now raises the question back home in South Carolina, what happens now? Again, feels very early to be talking about this, but there will be a decision to be made by the governor there.
That's right. Temporary replacement and then a special election will be held. Look, this is a reliably red seat, so it's hard to see it changing hands. Of course, you never know what could potentially happen. But Senator Graham was fighting for his 5th term in office. Gives you a sense of just how long he served in the Senate before being a member of Congress before that. And he was someone who was acutely aware of the power of the Trump base. In fact, during the primary, he was running against someone who was trying to cast himself as being a part of the MAGA base. But Senator Lindsey Graham had the endorsement of President Trump, and so he did win his primary quite handily. He was locked in a general election bid. And so the question becomes, who will replace him? That's part of what we will be unpacking. But this is an extraordinary moment, Willie. You have former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who's hospitalized right now. Questions about when and whether he will return. It is worth noting this would have been Senator Graham's 64th appearance, making him the 2nd most frequent guest to his dear friend, John McCain.
Wow. Yeah, those two were running mates for so much time together there in that building in the Capitol behind you. Kristen Welker, thanks so much. Kristen will be covering, of course, the death of Senator Graham on Meet the Press with that interview of President Trump. And we will have much more coming up on Sunday today and throughout the day on NBCnews.com. For now, we send our condolences to the family, friends, and colleagues of Senator Lindsey Graham. I'm Willie Geist. This has been an NBC News special report.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.